everyone. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by SpeedStream. I'm Jim Cardle. With just a few short days left before November 4th's election, and while the national spotlight continues to be on the issue of Ebola in New York City, polls show that here in Texas, the number one issue on the mind of the voters is border security and immigration. State Representative Dan Flynn from House District 2 is a member of the House Homeland Security Committee. He's also a member of the Texas State Guard. Flynn has just returned from yet another trip to the Rio Grande Valley, where he was escorting a delegation of out-of-state legislators. And Flynn says the only way Texas can confront the border issue is with 100% commitment. It contains no compromise. State Representative Dan Flynn is with us today to talk about border security. We're pleased to be able to visit with State Rep Dan Flynn. Representative Flynn, thanks for joining us.
It's always a pleasure to be back.
As I mentioned in the intro, you have a number of crucial positions. You are the chairman of a committee or two and have been in the past, but want to jump right in if we can, and before getting to your border security trip. Tell us, if you can, we're just a week out or so from the election. You have not only been traveling the country, but certainly traveling Texas. What do you see in terms of the mind of the Texas voter? Are we going to have a good turnout? Or is there enthusiasm for voting in Texas? What's your read?
Well, you know, midterms never have the great volume of voters turnout that we see in a presidential year. But I think you are going to have a pretty good, significant turnout. Because the mood of the people, they're unhappy. They feel like that they're being overrun by regulations coming out of Washington, D.C., and they want to see change. As far as in Texas, I think that they see Greg Abbott as continuing the successful policies of Governor Perry, and I think our friend Dan Patrick is going to also have a continued conservative bent in the Texas Senate, and of course Ken Paxton, I believe he will carry out all of the protection of the laws that Greg Abbott has done, and so I'm looking forward to seeing a good conservative bent. I think we'll continue to keep the Texas House. We may pick up a seat or two. I think that the Texas Senate is going to have probably the largest increase of new members in my tenure, and I'm looking forward to that. I think it'll be exciting. I think you're going to see a general more conservative Senate than we've seen before. So I think this is the mood of the people, and I think that they're looking forward to seeing the continued prosperity of the state of Texas.
How about, in particular, the economy, education, border security, immigration? You're from Van, a little northeast of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Dallas in particular. What are some of the issues that you're hearing are on the minds of the voters this cycle?
You know, Jim, it's amazing to me. Whether I go to a town hall meeting, a chamber of commerce, or any of the service clubs, it's always number one question is about border security and immigration. And that's kind of been unusual, because usually it's always been the public education and healthcare pretty close together. But really at this time, border security and immigration policies, that's very prevalent on the mind of everyone. Now, most of the surveys that I've seen have been before the Ebola conflict. That, in the last few weeks, certainly is heavy on the minds of the people. But border security remains a major concern to them. For education, not a lot we're going to have to figure out what Judge Dietz really is.
We've got school finance and special sessions, I'm sure, planning for your year next year.
Yeah, and then the public health care, we're going to have to deal with that, because as Obamacare takes its effect, it's going to cost us a lot of money, and we're going to have to figure out how the state is going to handle it.
Let's drill down into that a little bit more. I know you've taken numerous trips down to the Rio Grande and to the border. You're a colonel in the Texas State Guard. Appreciate your work there, but in the last couple of weeks, you've taken a group of Colorado senators. You mentioned before sitting down that there are other states willing to help, but what did you see in the most recent trip for border security? Has our Texas Guard surge been productive, helping, or what are you hearing from other states?
From other states, they're concerned because they don't want that border to move up to their state, and they recognize the significance of what Texas is doing. They greatly appreciate what Governor Perry has done. The State Guard and the National Guard, they're a force multiplier. The Department of Public Safety is our first line of defense, and we need to be sure we address that in the middle of the river. Because once they get over here, then the next thing you know, we have to deal with federal issues. And if they're Mexicans, we can send them back. If they're what we call OTMs or other than Mexicans, then they go into the federal process, and that's where they give them what they call a permissio slip, tell them to come back in 30, 40, 60 days, and I don't think that's been real successful. If it weren't for what our governor, Rick Perry, and Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst and Speaker Strauss had done when they stepped up, there's no telling what the crisis we would be facing right now. We have absolutely no assistance from the federal government. It's shameful.
Let me ask you in that regard, because you're a member of the Border Security Committee in particular, how many, perhaps not to put you on the spot with anything confidential or classified, but there are deaths that are reported. There are deaths that are not reported. There's gang activity. There's criminal activity. It impacts our state economy. Make a comment or two on that regard, if you would, because I assume you're referring to it's been hampered by the governor's actions here in Texas.
No question, and the large number of loss of life has been on the Mexican side of the border. Obviously, it comes over here to us, and you'll hear reports from a lot of the counties of the number of bodies that will be in their counties. We have to go help pick up those bodies, and they're young people. They come across with 80 pounds of dope on their backs, and then once they get here, they're abused, and then they're killed. And then so we know this: the drug cartel will not mess with the DPS, because we're driving gunboats with 30 caliber machine guns on it, and they know that they will shoot back if they shoot at us. And so I think that the Guard is the force multiplier. We're there, and they are armed with sidearms, and everyone wears body armor down there. When the groups from out of state come down here, they're always expecting the worst, and they leave feeling pretty good that they see what we're doing in Texas. Now, everyone complains a lot about, well, you're only really controlling 100 miles of the border. Well, basically, what you know, we got 1,250 miles of border. Nobody's climbing the mountains in the Santa Helena Canyons and Big Bend or the Boquitas Canyon or any of those lonely spots, because what they're looking for are the highways. They've got to get on Interstate 10. They've got to get on Interstate 35, because those are the corridors that they're able to deliver. It's more of a criminal activity that a lot of our folks don't really, they haven't understood that. The fellow coming over here for a job, well, that does affect our schools, it does affect our health care, but the others are coming over here to either kill us, and about 70% of the people coming across the border are OTMs. They are the other than Mexican people. And they're coming from the Middle East, they're coming from China, they're coming from Central and South America, and those are the ones that we're seeing stopped. And there's been a significant decrease in what's happening. The reports that I get from our director, Steve McCraw, and his assistant director at Homeland Security, Robert Bodish, they're very encouraging. Long ways to go. I mean, we still have a serious problem, and really, here again, the federal government does nothing to help us. We're very fortunate. It's costing the state of Texas a lot of money, and we need for the federal government to step up and do what their responsibility is.
Okay, we'll pivot to that real quick. Before doing so, though, I want to thank you all for joining us. We're visiting with State Representative Dan Flynn from House District 2, a member of the Homeland and Border Security Committee and Vice Chairman of the Financial Services Committee in the House of Representatives. Mr. Chairman, in that regard, you mentioned some of the more national impact activities along the border. You have just been elevated to a position of the board of the NCSL, National Conference of State Legislators, a big national leadership organization for state legislators. But when you're talking to fellow legislators in different parts of the states, if you believe what you see or read on a lot of the news programs. It's that Texas is going too far, or Texas is being politically incorrect, or that we're still a bunch of the Wild West, so to speak, trying to shut down our border. What do you hear from your peers in other states, and what, if anything, is the NCSL thinking about Texas?
When I walk into the room, my fellow legislators from other states always come up to me and they say, "How are you doing it in Texas?" And I said, "We're using basic conservative principles. We're taking advantage of our natural resources. We're looking for strength in our family values, in traditional family values. We're looking at strength, and we believe in protecting life, and we want to have a business climate that's not full of regulations, that we can continue to grow." Kind of back to the border issue a little bit, because that's a big issue with the NCSL. The federal government cut $42 billion out of our National Guard budget. That affects every state in the union. And so this is something that we can all come together, whether it's an R or a D.
Now, let me interrupt you there, because if I recall correctly, the Congress has been out for the last month. They passed a continuing resolution. I assume you were referring to some of the funding numbers in that.
Correct.
Recently passed.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
$42 billion.
Yeah, that's what we've got to fact is, we passed a resolution. It was a resolution that I introduced, and it was in our committee, the Military Task Force Committee, and it was unanimously adopted. All of the governors of all 50 states also signed on to it, and it went to the United States Congress, and I believe that we're going to have a positive response on restoring those funds back into the National Guard system. It's pretty simple. A guardsman costs about 1/3 of what a regular service military man costs.
Okay.
And so they're citizen soldiers, they're volunteers. We have the greatest volunteer army in the world, and we need to go. As a matter of fact, back to the border issue, we've got all these states that are coming down here volunteering. In fact, the last trip I was down there, I had a young woman from Nebraska, 4 tours, 2 of them in Afghanistan and 2 of them in Iraq. She was the pilot of our helicopter, and I asked her, "What are you doing down here?" And she says, "This is real life experience training that I want to get. If I'm in Nebraska, I'm just going to be doing training missions, and I joined the military because I want to protect my country."
Very, very encouraging to
Yes.
hear you say something like that. One final question, we'll let you get on your way. Chairman Flynn, how about in particular looking toward the 2015 legislative session, and particularly in regard to the border security? Do you anticipate there will be any additional desire by the state legislature? And again, can you help define the levels of success? Is it, for instance, been a seasonal change perhaps on the border, or what can we anticipate for the next 6 months perhaps?
You're seeing the change. First of all, the federal government's not advertising in South America for folks to come up here. That's one thing. And then the other thing is the force multiplier that we have. We've got our National Guard on there. They assist with our Department of Public Safety, and this is not an unusual assignment for them. When we have hurricanes, National Guardsmen ride with the local DPS. They have the arrest authority, and we are able to help them. We're able to be their eyes and ears. And of course, when you see that United States Army uniform, it makes people think twice. They are armed, and I think that the way that we have handled this is being successful. Will continue to be successful, and if we can depend on getting a change in Washington, and I think these elections that are coming up are very important, because the United States Congress, the congressional members, they have passed over 375 bills that are sitting on the desk of Harry Reid, and the Senate needs to act on that. And if the current administration doesn't want to do it, then it tells the rest of the nation a whole story of what's happening. If we've got Congress that are passing bills and they get stuck in the executive section of the administration, then that tells us a story of what people's ideas are and where they want to go with this country.
Well, speaking of wanting to go and places to go, I know you've got a busy schedule. We're going to leave it at that, and always appreciate you coming in. Appreciate your being here today.
And Jim, I appreciate what Texas Insider does. You do an outstanding job of taking the news to the consumers. You're taking the news to the people that need to hear it. You do it on a fair and equitable basis, and I appreciate that.
Well, we can't do any better than that. Thank you for the compliment and for what you do for the state for coming by today.
God bless you.
Thank you, folks, for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV with House of Representatives member Dan Flynn from HD2. We want you to be sure and tune in for election coverage and further editions of Texas Insider TV. Remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle.